everyone, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host, Objectively Dan, and joining me today at the last minute is my very good friend,
Skeptic.
Genetically Modified Skeptic. Yeah. So, as some of you may have noticed, this is not Josh. So we had to have a last minute switching of our co-host here. That's why we started a little late today. But we're just going to roll with it. We're just going to keep going. And a lot of you guys like Drew anyway and wondering when he was going to come back. So here he is. Drew, what have you been up to, man?
Just working on the next video, and that entails watching a lot of straw man arguments. I'm doing a specifically atheist video this time, watching a lot of straw man arguments. You know, atheists say this, atheists say that. They never said any of those things that these people are saying, and I'm just trying to defeat the straw man.
So nothing new is kind of what you're telling me, huh?
Yeah, not too much has changed, but hopefully it will be an interesting video.
All right, that's awesome. Well, just to remind you guys, the lines are open. You can see the number at the bottom of the screen there. We have open lines for anybody who wants to call in. So yeah, this is a show about talking about beliefs. Doesn't matter what you believe or why. We want to know, and we want to know how you got there. And you can ask us about what we believe and how we got to the positions that we do. We're open to any kinds of conversations. So if you don't want to call in particular, get a friend, get somebody to call in. Like I said, we'll get you as soon as you come on. We have completely open lines. Until then, it's just going to be the Drew and Dan show. I've been talking to Drew about trying to get our own podcast anyway. I think that we're just two interesting people that deserves our own show like that. But
right? Yeah. I mean, that's not what every 20-something-year-olds think about themselves, right?
Well, I mean, it's the difference between what you think about yourself and what you're actually capable of. And we're both content creators who actually put stuff out there. So I think that we're at least somewhat a step above. We're not like the one kid in high school who says he's going to be a rapper and then like doesn't do anything about it, right? We're actually trying to.
That's true. I mean, we have somewhat of a platform, right? I mean,
yeah,
we're in a small community, Sometimes I think about the platform that I have now, and I just hit 80,000 subscribers today.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Well, thanks. And it's, sometimes I think, oh yeah, like I have this big platform or whatever. And now when I went to the ACA, people knew who I was, and it's always cool to see that. And anytime I go in the comment section of an atheist video or something, people always know who I am and Facebook groups and stuff, but it's also a really small community at the same time. So when you become like influential or you have like a platform in this community, the atheist community is still small enough to where everyone knowing you is not that many people knowing you. So I try to remind myself of that. With every subscriber I get, it's like, okay, that's cool, but the fact that Cosmic Skeptic has 200,000 subscribers or more, that's like everyone, it seems like. And so
yeah, it's like it's a particular segment of the population that that you can like measure to a very specific degree, like probably from the United States, probably white, probably, I mean, your audience in particular, younger than a lot of the other content creators that usually produce the kind of stuff that we do. Yeah, it's weird. I remember the first few times I had people recognize me from doing stuff with Anthony from the other podcasts and stuff, and I was like, whoa, that's a crazy, crazy feeling. And then you realize, oh, it's fragmented because I'm at the ACA. So, of course, the people who are watching the stuff I do is also interested in the ACA stuff, so it kind of gets decontextualized a little bit. But it's still fun. It's still nice to meet people and be like, oh, yeah, you've changed the way that I look at things. And it's like, wow, it's a powerful thing to hear.
It's so close-knit that you had never made any content of your own. Well, you had been a co-host on the Epistemic podcast for a little bit.
That's where people,
When I first heard of you and became familiar with you, you had never produced content of your own. And that stayed in my mind until we actually met in person and we knew who each other were, right? So, yeah, it's no matter how small, I mean, the community's so small that like small bit players are recognizable. So it's really hard to distinguish between like a bit player and like someone who's really influential? Is there any difference between someone that's really influential and
How much your Patreon brings in? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the exact metric for sure.
Yeah, if that's the case, then I'm not doing super great, but I just got things started here, so life is good. Subscribe to the Truth Wanted Patreon, by the way. We have that. Oh, another quick announcement. We're also about to be available on iTunes as well. So check in on that if you like just listening to the show. And what else was I going to say, Drew? I think I was also going to say that you are getting ready to prepare for your next conference, right?
Yeah. I'll be at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, conference in, it's the first weekend of November. So I think I'm flying out there. I'll be there on the 2nd. And I'm really looking forward to that. It's in San Francisco this year, I believe. And yeah, I'm super psyched about that. I actually didn't even know that CSICon was this week. Like,
yeah,
I might have thought of going to it if I would have realized, but I totally missed that. But yeah,
I'm getting like Eric went and all the other guys here from the ACA, and I'm just like mad jelly. I saw a picture on Thomas Westbrook, Holy Kool-Aid's Facebook of him meeting with Adam from Adam Ruins Everything.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, God damn, that's so cool. So yeah, I'm feeling the feels, but I'm also a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Yeah. And I thought about going. I'm just so busy with school and doing this and other stuff right now that it would just, and plus, it's expensive to go to San Francisco.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
I wish that you were going to that because I'm going to be able to hang out with Thomas and Telltale. So that's going to be really fun. And it's like, I feel like you also need to be there. Like if Telltale's there, then we also need to have you and Rachel there because it needs to be like when we did the SSA con. Like that's what it needs to be. It doesn't make sense if you're not there for some reason.
Yeah, oh my God, if we could do that like we did at the SSA con, just have all of us together because it was you, me, and Telltale, and I wanted to get Thomas there too, and he couldn't come. It would be such a blast. But we have somebody on the phone, and I think I know who it is. Calling in. Is this my buddy Dean? Dean, are you there?
No.
No. Okay. Hi. What's up? How's it going?
Pretty well. Pretty well. Just woke up. Worked really late last night, and I woke up to the podcast.
Yeah. Welcome to Truth Wanted. I'm your host, Objectively Dan. This is Genetically Modified Skeptic. What do you want to talk about?
Hey. So I'd actually like to talk about political debunking.
Okay. What about political debunking?
So something that really bothers me is that in this age, truth has become subjective, and that really bugs me. How do you become skeptical and debunk, what are objective fallacies on either side of the political spectrum?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this idea of truth being a subjective construct has rattled a lot of people's brains because it kind of makes the conversation seem like you can't actually gain any ground. I know you've dealt with this specifically in some of your videos, GM Skeptic. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, one thing is when we're talking about relative truth or personal truth or something like that, a lot of the time the way that people break it down is a thought experiment. And I'll say my piece, and maybe Dan, we can break down the thought experiment together, the whole thing with the gumballs or with the Tic Tacs or whatever that a lot of
I have the gumballs here, by the way.
So the first thing that I'll say is when it comes to subjective truth, I don't think people are always actually valuing truth or thinking truth is somehow subjective because they actually intellectually entertain that. They think that that's how the nature of truth is that. I think that it's a kind of cognitive dissonance, and the reason why they end up touting this idea of subjective truth, or that they can have their truth and other people can have their truth or whatever, is they want to hold on to what they already believe for some reason. Maybe it's an emotional reason or whatever, but they hold on to that so tightly that they're able or they're willing to redefine truth entirely. And ultimately it has, I think that actually figuring that out in a conversation has more to do with figuring out if they value knowledge more than belief, and not just what do they think the nature of truth is. It's not just as simple as doing the gumball experiment or the thought experiment, but I think that is one important part of it in trying to do thought experiments and say, what is the nature of truth intellectually? Like, how do we actually entertain this? So as far as the street epistemology, as far as I know, the street epistemology created thought experiment of the gumballs or Tic Tacs. Dan, would you want to run through that?
Yeah, so that's this. Let me grab these gumballs over here. Oh my God, I got all this fire. Okay, so there's these gumballs here. Has a whole jar full of them. And if I were to ask you how many are in here, you might not be able to tell me. You know, there's a lot of them in here. We can't just tell.
I could do volumetric estimation.
Yeah, you could do a guesstimation. But what I would ask you more importantly is, even if we don't know exactly how many gumballs are in here, I could ask you, is it either an odd or an even number of gumballs? Like, can we agree that it has to be either even or odd? And hopefully somebody would say yes, unless there's some other construct of numbers that doesn't fall into the binary of even or odd, you know, and that can be with like 0 and some things. But like if I said to you, look at this jar of gumballs, and you said there were 0 of them, then we're not talking about the same thing anymore, right? So it kind of starts with this idea of you can break things down to at least some level, and whatever level you can break it down to, if it has to be odd or even numbers, you know, you can't say that they're both odd and even. Or you can't say that they're neither odd or even, because at that point, it just doesn't make sense semantically. You're not really describing anything. So that's one way to kind of use as a thought experiment, is to ask someone, okay, can we at least agree that there's like an odd and even number? And you can kind of like break down questions from there. Yeah, as far as, I've never encountered anybody that has actually said all truth is subjective. But it can be tricky when we talk about people's quote unquote versions of the truth that they have. For example, some people might say like a religion is true to them and not true to somebody else, which as a descriptive claim, actually, like, yes, it is true to you and not to everybody else, but that doesn't mean that we're all sharing in the same kind of universe at that point, if that makes any sense. Because if you're using like rules that only apply to yourself or your own worldviews that don't apply to other people's, then I would say that, I mean, you can call that delusion, you can call that just a break from reality. It just doesn't match up with other people's experiences, and that would be kind of the problems that we face when we have these kinds of conversations.
But you see, that's a very ground up, very first principles approach. But the problem is much more systemic than that. It's the, for example, in the gumball experiment, you have to see the gumballs and, you know, recognize that the gumballs exist in common and so on. I've found with recent events and phenomena that a lot of people refuse to even accept the existence of common facts and commonality, and this gets really fervent when political tribalness gets asserted. Now, the best way to do this uncontroversially, to give an uncontroversial example, would be policy. We can actually figure out whether or not a policy is effective or not by doing evidence-based policy formation. That's something that's being practiced around the world. You can create micro experiments and see if it works, if it impacts parametrics, and so on and so forth. And yet, even if you show people the evidence, it doesn't. They refuse to see the evidence, and they don't accept that it's real.
Yeah.
You know?
So here's my advice on that, because that does happen. You can show some evidence, some people some evidence, and then they just don't accept that either there's a psychological rejection or they don't quite understand the information being presented to them, or maybe the information itself is wrong in some form and it has been presented in the best way. There's a lot of things you can break it down, but sometimes showing people the evidence for something doesn't work. And actually, most of the time it doesn't happen because like we don't always accept facts that don't already collude with our worldviews. So my suggestion is, if you're trying to suggest someone that one policy is, say, better than the other, a lot of the science has shown that if we can make arguments that are more centered around someone's values, for example, if you're talking about gay rights with somebody, whether gay people should have the right to marriage just like as much as straight people, an issue that, although it's kind of been solved, there's still people who disagree with that assumption. If you make it under, if you imagine, if you're talking to somebody, like that who disagrees with that, you can make arguments that they would make for other kinds of things, like, oh, these gay people are hardworking Americans, they serve our country, they do all kinds of things. So you're kind of making these appeals to like patriotism, you're making appeals to loyalty, all kinds of appeals that they might agree to that might be more convincing to somebody than saying like, oh man, you just don't care about, this is a human rights thing. This is like something that like doesn't necessarily appeal to someone who leans more to the right than it would to somebody who's on the left. So you can kind of work with those kinds of value structures that people already have and kind of make your arguments more compatible with those structures.
Could I suggest another example? Because I'd love to see you work through it.
Yeah, go for it.
One of the economists who helped design the policy behind Medicare and Medicaid, the original Medicare policy, they pointed out when there is abject market failure when it comes to the patient and doctor and insurer level of healthcare, because each entity has misaligned incentives. The incentives of the doctor don't align with that of the insurer. For the doctor, it's about delivering care. It's not about delivering objective goals or just getting them into tests and so on and repeatable outcomes and blah, 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 blah. It's about delivering care, whereas for the patient, it's about getting well and so on and so forth, whereas for the insurer, it's about reducing the cost of the exercise, and where a doctor might suggest something that might be more expensive, but it might be better for the patient's long-term approach. The patient might want to see the doctor more frequently, which is actually shown to reduce, chronic health outcomes, because it's more likely that the doctor will see, oh, you are overweight, you're probably pre-diabetic, I need you to do this and this and this, so you're more likely to catch ailments earlier. So it's in this triad. Every entity has a distinct motive that's separate, and this is what leads to market failure, precisely because the insurer has the most information, the doctor has a little bit more than the patient, but not enough, and the patient has the least amount of information and no amount of choice, because you have to, you're going to value your life to an infinite degree. You will always do something to save your life. Your parents, your spouse, your children will also value it to quite a large degree. So therefore, there is no other option than to opt into the healthcare system.
Right.
So therefore, you don't have the element of choice that's essential to a capitalistic market.
Yes.
So even though money is being exchanged in this, it's not exactly a free market. It's a perfect example of what the economists call market failure. Now, convincing someone who is, for example, a right-wing libertarian of this fact is next to impossible, because they won't even recognize the term market failure as being real.
Yeah, whatever the market says goes. Like, the market can never be wrong, right? Yeah.
Exactly, except markets can be an artificial construct. In some cases, they are self-forming and spontaneous emergent phenomena, but just because it's an exchange of money does not mean that there's a market there.
Mm-hmm.
So getting some people to recognize this is next to impossible.
Yeah.
Even if I show them the studies, even if I show them that, hey, behavioral, they've done the math. It doesn't work.
Yeah. So again, it's about appealing to the values, the reason why there's a lot of people or the kinds of reasons that people say why we shouldn't adopt a single payer healthcare system is they talk about choice. They talk about, we want the Americans should have the right to choice. And that's these appeals again to this individualism, these kinds of things that we already value in our, as Americans, basically, that we've come to value as a culture. And that can be an effective argument. Again, the effectiveness of an argument can differ from like whether actually something or not is good or bad or in a sense worthwhile for somebody to have. You can make a pretty good argument, for example, either way, whether we should have protections on like free speech and stuff. I mean, it's all about framing. It's all about figuring out what is going to appeal to the person the best. And that might mean getting to know that person a little bit and seeing what kind of things that they're interested in. I know a lot of the people that I talk to when it comes to like healthcare stuff, they're interested in, okay, but does the system work? Does it make economic sense? And that's something that they value. So maybe if I was to argue for like a single payer healthcare system, for example, not saying that I would or wouldn't, but if I did, I would make those kinds of appeals. I would say, okay, well, this is how this would make sense in an economic way, because I know that that's what you care about. And this is, if I go to them saying, I just want everyone, I think healthcare is a right for everybody to have, and you should agree with me, you should share this value with me, then your case for arguing with somebody is going to not be as effective, not because it's not right and not because it's not true, but because it's not going to appeal to them the same way. So,
yeah, people make decisions not based on reason a lot of the time. It's like the supreme being which makes the decisions ultimately in our minds, or even just maybe initial decisions usually isn't the reasonable bit of our minds. We make decisions based on other things, and then we kind of sort things out reasonably later on, if ever. And what we advocate for is to try to use that reasonable bit as much as you can, while acknowledging that you're not always going to be able to let it take over your brain all the time, and neither is anyone else. So it's really we're not trying to be perfect with how we convince people. There's no perfect logical argument that's going to do it. It's really just approximating what we think an ideal is ultimately when it comes to trying to convince anyone or just being reasonable in general. We'll never be perfect, but we can get closer and closer. And I think that history demonstrates that we have. Hopefully, we'll eventually be able to convince people with reason a little bit more reliably than we can right now.
Yeah, for sure. But it's a great topic to bring up. Thank you for calling. Really appreciate it. What was your name?
Mira, and thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks again.
And apologies for my little girl in the background.
Yeah, it's all good. Thanks again for calling in. As far as, again, like you're talking about improving better and better, I was reading this week on some of the arguments that people were having for like owning slaves back in the day, or why it wasn't something that was as spread fast as one from our generation might look at that from was, well, we need to respect the owner's rights.
Yeah.
These owners have these rights, and we can't just take away their property like this. So like it's an entirely different framework of mind that you're working at. Something like every single person having individual human rights may not have been a concept that that people who owned slaves may have valued at that time.
Right. It was kind of a values change rather than just people using straight reason or straight logic or empiricism to try to prove one way or the other. There was a lot of appealing to values and value changes fundamentally. And oddly enough, it seems that making a decision or changing your mind based on empirical fact is more surface level, and it would be easier because it's not supposed to affect your entire framework, right? Like one fact doesn't have to necessarily. It's more on top, but your values they're closer to the bottom. And yet and yet it seems that you can affect some of the things that are closer to the bottom, sometimes more reliably or more effectively than things just at the top. But don't we want to affect the things at the bottom rather than at the top if a lot of the stuff at the top is wrong?
That's true. And like, what if we do need a change of values? You know, how do we make those kinds of arguments? It's a whole other thing. And I'm certainly not an expert on that, but I might have some ideas. But let's go on to another topic. This is Rami in New York. Rami, can you hear us?
Hi, guys. It's Rami, and I'm actually in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Oh, Massachusetts. Okay. Somebody put NY on here, so don't know why. Cool.
Oh, no, it's quite all right.
Yeah. So what's up, man? How's it going?
Well, I've had better years. So I called to talk, because you guys asked for something in Facebook for us to call in. I've called the Talk Heathen show a few times, and let me start out by saying I absolutely love the way that the ACA is empowering you guys, the next generation of outspoken atheists, to have these shows and to have these conversations. It's incredibly important. Everything you're doing is super valuable to all of us. So thank you for that. And if you have one, hi, live studio audience. Woo! Love you.
Yeah, it's
and everybody at the ACA. You guys are all amazing. Cast, crew, everybody doing all the groundwork. It's just wonderful to see you guys expanding and doing your thing. So, here's my deal.
Okay.
I am an atheist. I have been for about 10 years. I started out much as Matt Dillahunty did as a Southern Baptist, but I was never really, serious to the level that he was. My grandparents were very much so. Their children, not so much so. And so I didn't get the kind of indoctrination. I got tastes of it and enough to kind of poison my mind for decades to come. But, that this isn't my story. This is the story of me from the past year. Okay, so check it out. In February, my partner's father died. On September 1st, we had to put our dog down because he was a 12-year-old golden retriever and he got lymphoma and we didn't want him to suffer. So, we feel good about the decision, but, it was a big loss for us. On October 4th, which happens to be my partner's birthday, we had to cut down the 100-foot white pine in our front yard because it dropped a branch off of onto somebody's car. Luckily, not while it was moving or anybody was in it, but our neighbors were very displeased. And on that same day, we had to put down our 15-year-old cat. It's just been a train wreck nightmare for, a good year. And, we're still solid and things are good, but, life has taken a turn. Anyway, my partner grew up Catholic and ended up becoming an apostate, so around 12 or 13, something like that. She was fortunately never molested, and I count her as incredibly lucky for that. She does too. And yet she still has a kind of an afterlife kind of thought. I know it's very common for those of us who have made our way out of religion to kind of retain some of those magical woo thinking and, some of the nonsensical things that we were indoctrinated into when we were young. And it seems like one of the last vestiges that she has of that kind of magical thinking is this nebulous afterlife kind of, maybe, he's somewhere better or, maybe, we'll see them again when we die. It always seems to be like some variant of that wishful, reunion kind of stuff. And she's, no chump. She doesn't believe in God. She doesn't believe in, the churches for sure. But she's just clinging to this last vestige of it. And I've tried explaining, that she doesn't have to lose the comfort because there's plenty of comfort to be had in what actually seems to happen when we die. I mean, I gave her the whole "you want a physicist at your funeral" treatment. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's an absolutely wonderful. I'm sorry, my neighbors are shouting. It's an absolutely wonderful piece that basically describes that nothing is ever lost, that our energy and our matter are still part of the universe. Everything is still here. Every BTU of heat that our body has produced is still warming the universe, and all the light particles that we've interacted with have been changed by our presence. And, it is a wonderful affirmation of what seems to actually go on. And I just don't see why more is necessary. And why it's so hard to get rid of those last vestiges of that. I mean, I know why, because it's hard to let go.
Yeah.
And I mean, what I've learned over my almost 50 years is that life is a process of learning to let go of everything, including at the very end, your own life. Mm-hmm. And you have to be okay with it and, reconcile to the whole idea of death. And, I think it's healthy to get to that point where you can kind of look at it as, the inevitable consequence of being born.
Yeah.
And I know that there are people in our society, the ultra rich especially, who are pursuing a dream of immortality. And who knows, in our development, maybe they'll get to it. Maybe we'll survive as a species. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll look radically different, 1,000 years from now. We won't even recognize humans as what we once were because of our, cybernetic bodies or whatever. Our existence in an energy matrix, whatever, pick your Star Trek.
Yeah, transhumanist
episode.
Utopia.
Right. So my question for you, I guess, would be, how would you work towards helping somebody? Oh, and it actually brings up an ancillary problem as well, which is it ethical to try to chip away at those ideas when they give so much hope and they give so much comfort, even if they're nebulous and unsupported and magical? So I guess it's a combination between those two questions. Like, how do you chip away at it, and when and how is it ethical to chip away at it?
Yeah, I have my own ideas about this and I have my own answer. But first of all, thank you again for the compliments on the show. I really appreciate that. I hope to make this show more than just an atheist show. I'm interested in exploring all kinds of claims about all kinds of things. And so I hope that other people who are watching this also see that we can one day talk about Reiki and UFOs and all kinds of stuff. I know that we're the atheist community of Austin, so religion becomes a big thing, and I hope that we're able to expand on that. But I want to hear Drew's answer first to these two questions that you brought up before. And could you be careful with your phone? We're kind of picking up a little bit of background noise right now.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm actually crunching through some leaves on my way back to the house.
Sure.
It'll be over in a moment.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm glad that you're considering the ethical question here rather than it just saying, this is just something that's not true, just get rid of it, because it is more complex than that. And I think that we fall into a hole when we decide, if something is just true, then automatically you have to believe it right now, apply it right now, and there's no other ethical question other than believing what is true and what is not true. It is more complex than that, even if you decide yes, then believing true things is the most paramount, value to have. But so first of all, just to answer, why someone would hold on to it, I think that in a lot of ways, you answer your question in just saying that it does give hope, and see, an afterlife is something. We're getting a good amount of noise here, so you might wanna cup your mic or something like that. Just try to.
Or you can just mute it and then talk to us when you are ready to.
I have none of those things available to me. I'm sorry. I'm on my crappy Obama phone. I'm grateful for it, but it doesn't have the best reception here. I'll step inside and see if that works better.
No worries.
Sure.
There we go.
But yeah, so it does offer a lot of hope, obviously, and so that's why people hold on to it. I think that as beyond just, I don't know, maybe this actually is just tied directly into an emotional appeal of the belief, but really, when you're taught something in childhood and you're taught something as like this deep fundamental value or this fundamental truth about existence, it's really, really hard to overthrow that. And that's why, coming out as an atheist or deconverting can be this huge, long process. I mean, people don't just, I've heard a couple of stories. I would be lying if I said that I believe them entirely. There are people that say, I became an atheist over a weekend or something. It usually doesn't happen that way, if it happens at all. It takes a very long time. And I mean, for me, you know, it was like 6 months or something like that. And that is fast, it seems like, in the scheme of things. And so letting go of something like that is something that not everyone is necessarily able to do, and or wants to do, depending on the belief. But this is just, I think the main thing I'm saying here is this may be sewn in to her understanding of reality fundamentally, so much so that even if it didn't offer hope, that getting rid of that and replacing it, like tearing out that block and putting in a new one, would be almost catastrophic, or it's seen as catastrophic. Like it would have to be a catastrophic process. It'd have to melt a lot of things down. Now, that said, with the whole afterlife thing, I think that there are harmful, and I think that there are potentially like neutral, beneficial ideas of the afterlife. I mean, obviously, if you are serving the afterlife rather than life here on Earth, and you know there doesn't happen to be any evidence for an actual afterlife, well, that's probably pretty bad. You probably don't want to do that. But there's a lot of ideas of the afterlife that aren't anything like that. You don't have to serve them. You will just have it. It's just inherent. It's just innate. That will just happen regardless of what you do. So you're not going to change it by, you know, living a certain way here on Earth necessarily. And that sounds like it's a little bit closer to the truth. I mean, I've said this to a caller before. I mean, just on the last show, I think ultimately the most important thing is showing love and care. And if anything was going to replace the need for that afterlife as far as clinging to hope, it probably would be love from a partner. And it sounds like you're giving her that, which is, I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of this figured out and you're still searching for more of an answer, for more of a method to deal with this. And I'd say that the fact that you're in that process, that you're in that journey, that's the right answer. You're finding the right answer right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me get to my answer here. And
Please.
The first question I would ask myself is, why is this important to me? And what I mean by that is this question, is this idea of the afterlife, this belief that she holds, so important to me enough that she believes otherwise, that I need to have a conversation with her about it, that I need to take this away. And that's something that I can't answer for you. That's something you have to, you know, figure out with yourself. Because sometimes we're so ready to jump at what we believe is true and the conclusions that we've come to that we're willing to just share that with everybody. And sometimes we're not in the best place to do that, or we don't always address the needs of other people when we do that. So again, it's a time and place kind of thing. And there's no book that we can look to that says yes or no, this is a good idea. I mean, we can look at the psychology literature and we could say that, you know, these kinds of beliefs may be helping someone be psychologically stable. They may be helping them get through the day. So if that's the case, and if that's your deepest concern is, I want her to have something that supports her, but I don't want it to be something that's not true, I think you're on the right track with maybe demonstrating, like you're talking about the story of the physician, the physics scientist at the funeral, right? These sort of metaphors that we can look forward to in describing our existential crises that we discover when we may figure out that there's no reason to believe that for any kind of afterlife, we have no evidence of any of the kind. And that process may be looking for other ways to, you know, describe that existential dread or to alleviate that existential dread through ways that she's comfortable with. Because like the metaphors that you've found, the scientist at the funeral may not be as compelling to her. She might find some other way. Maybe she likes Alan Watts or somebody who can kind of explain things in a metaphor that she likes. Because metaphors can talk about true things without necessarily being true themselves. And that's kind of an important distinction. As a secular humanist, I like to say that when I die, it's not just the end of me. It's everything that I've done here on this earth gets to live on in some form or another and that the causes that I've started here will have effects long term after I'm gone. So that gives me a lot of peace and a lot of comfort. That may not give the same kinds of comfort to somebody else, and that's a responsibility that they have to deal with. But again, it comes down to that very first question of, is this even worth talking about? Because it's not to say that you're not sacrificing truth, but there are consequences to having these kinds of discussions. So hopefully that helps. I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Drew. You guys are very insightful. I appreciate all of your thoughts. And again, I appreciate what you do. I actually have a friend who believes in giants and a global flood. Would you be interested in talking with him at some point?
Absolutely. You talk about Nephilim? I'm down for the Nephilim, dude.
He's talked. Well, I don't know if they're Nephilim. I think he's referenced the Bible a couple of times as being, one mention of them. But he also believes that there were giant remains found all over the United States, and he believes that the localized flood 12,000 years ago from the comet that hit, which I actually looked up, and that's actual science, or at least according to the sources that I looked at, which were fairly neutral and seemed to be science-based. There was apparently a comet that hit, I don't even know where it hit, 12,000 years ago, or rather a meteor that hit, or a meteorite, whatever it's called, and it hit the Earth and caused a flood over much of the populated world. It wasn't a global flood, and it certainly wasn't, to the proportions described in the Bible, but it certainly would have been responsible for like breaking land dams and causing, the Adriatic Sea and stuff like that to flood. But he seems to think it was more of a global flood. And he's got some very interesting and unusual beliefs. I hope that I can get him to call in.
Yes, and here's why you should.
I would love to hear it.
I don't even know if I should be talking about this, but I have been talking with. You might be familiar with Paulogia. Who does?
I'm not familiar. I'm sorry.
He does some. You should look him up afterwards, especially if you want to talk to your friend after this. He does these great breakdowns on lots of creationist claims and stuff. He reacts to a lot of what Ken Ham puts out there. I'm planning on having him as a guest host in the very near future. So when he comes on as my guest host, definitely have him come on, because he is the perfect guy to talk about those kinds of stuff. So.
Cool. Yeah, I'll totally give him your number. And could you say the gentleman's name again slowly and spell it?
It's Paulogia. So it's Paulogia. Paulogia. It's like apologist, apologia.
Yeah,
His name is Paul. So and he's a great YouTuber. Yeah, y'all should definitely check that out.
Italian.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks again for calling, and hope to hear from you again sometime.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Yeah. Big question. The ethics of talking to people about what they believe.
I found it kind of funny, when we have someone, or just talking to someone that's older than me and has more life experience there, and then, me offering my insight into it. It almost feels, it's almost intimidating in a way, because I feel like, maybe what I have to say isn't so insightful compared to what maybe they'd be able to say. But at the same time, I think thinking that just ends up stopping my search for the right answer, right? And it makes me kind of undervalue myself. It's not just like it undervalues your ability to actually find a reasonable answer. And if I just assume that everyone that's older than me is right, then, well, that kind of throws out every single belief that I have, right? Because I'm pretty sure there's someone that's older than me that disagrees with everything that I believe. So, So it doesn't really work out that way. But I do, I feel maybe respected is the right term, or valued. I'm honored that someone would call in and actually value what I have to say on something that profound. So
myself included. Because that was a big problem for me, this idea of, there's not going to be an afterlife. or that, hey, I mean, in some ways it was a relief because I thought I was going to hell anyway because I was doubting God at some point. But there's no one answer to how to deal with that. I don't think that there is. I have explanations, like I said, about how I deal with it myself and the conclusions that I've come to and what gives me peace. But that's not going to work for everybody. And you kind of have to just listen to other people and figure out what works for yourself. Because the cure to existentialism, I mean, I don't know. Some people say absurdism. Some people say nihilism. Or, you could just find meaning somewhere else. It's pretty different.
I think about that. I think about this problem as having an individual and a more societal level. And often I like to start in answering individual questions or just individual problems by looking at how society as a whole tends to deal with them. And if you look at places that have high degrees of education and have high degrees of just social cohesion and prosperity in a somewhat of a material but also familial sense, those people tend to just abandon supernatural beliefs. If you look at places like Europe, where in the richest parts, people just kind of leave them behind. They just leave the supernatural beliefs behind, and it kind of indicates they don't necessarily need them.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that, when I mention Northern Europe, people think like, oh yeah, atheism causes prosperity. No, it's not that. I think that prosperity often causes atheism, or at least just naturalism.
Yeah, they definitely don't need supernatural structures to compensate for the dread, but they do need structure in some ways, and that's why I advocate for discovering the metaphor that works for you. And for some people, that sounds really hippy-dippy. I mean, we all have cultural metaphors that we follow instinctively, even amongst atheists. Like, there are metaphors that we're using all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is when we make definitive claims about what is and is going to happen to us that, we kind of prescribe to people as these kinds of authoritarian truths, as far as, like, you have a soul, and it's going to go here, like A equals B, or A to B to C kind of methods of describing that just don't work. But let's go ahead and move on. So this is interesting. I have a call from Janet in Florida who wants to talk to us about the keto diet. Janet, what's up?
Hey, Dan. Hey, Drew.
Hey.
First of all, I want to throw out there that Drew is going to be on the Discord, the ACA Discord, doing a question and answer on October 24th at 6 Central.
Yeah, he is.
So everyone tune in for that and come ask Drew some questions. Put him on the hot seat.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that I'm done with my thing. So I thought I'd call up and ask about something that's not related to anything to do with religion. And about 5 months ago, I decided to start get the keto diet, which, if anyone in listening isn't aware of, it's a high-fat, moderate protein, low-carb diet, and it's actually 20 carbs or less a day. So it's not Atkins. It's like more extreme than Atkins. And I'm pretty convinced that it works, but there's really I'm going to say there's no concrete science behind my opinion. Like there's varying, you can look up the research and some say, yes, it does work. Others say, no, it doesn't work. So I would say it kind of like evens itself out to being a big fat nothing. But I'm pretty convinced it works. So I wanted to see, since there's no science behind it, it's basically a belief with no basis.
Ooh, okay. Well, I would, that's an interesting way that you put that it's a belief with no basis, but you do believe that it works. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think that beliefs always happen in a vacuum like that. I think there is some reason that you do attribute it to it working, but maybe you don't consider it a scientific reason. So
I don't. Yes, no basis in science.
Okay,
is yes, that's correct.
So let me ask you, Janet, what is the reason then that causes you to think that the keto diet does work?
Okay, so the first thing was I had my daughter almost 21 years ago. And after I had her, I had to have my gallbladder removed, thank you, Tori, because she had her foot stuck in it for the last 3 months of my pregnancy and ruined it. So I had to have my gallbladder removed. And ever since then, though, so for 21 years, I've had a lot of pain and acid reflux and I've been on medicine ever since. 3 days into the keto diet, I have not had to take any acid reflux medicine, and I have not had to take any now for almost, 5 months. And like I said, I was on it for 21 years. So that was like an immediate result that I attribute to the diet because literally nothing else changed.
Okay, so it kind of changed.
So that's the first thing, but we can start there.
Yeah. Okay. So it changed the way that you lived your life. Essentially, you started the keto diet and you started seeing these physiological changes in yourself.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sounds reasonable to me. Is there another reason that you consider higher than that, or is that your best reason?
The other thing is that another change that I immediately saw, and I'm sorry, my cat is like talking to my daughter, if you can hear it. Another one that I saw was that I used to have like inflammation in my knee, and I'd had that for like about 5 years, and the inflammation was completely gone. So now, one could say that was from the diet. Another thing you could say is that's from, weight loss. So I can't attribute it directly to changing the diet, but I can say that changing my diet contributed to weight loss, which probably contributed to this lack of inflammation. Now, that does have science behind it as far as like weight loss and inflammation, but there's no, direct correlation between doing keto and losing weight.
Yeah. Okay. So awesome. So you have a few reasons then, but you don't consider them science. And you keep bringing that up because to me, it sounds like you do value scientific.
I work in research.
Yeah. You value scientific consensus
that's
as
my job.
Yeah. Scientific consensus as how you consider a belief to be reasonable or a belief to be true.
Well, I think that it's fair to say that if there's a scientific literature behind something, that it bears more weight for being true than if there is no peer review.
Okay.
So I value it more highly. And I think most people who are, logical or rational thinkers
maybe
tend to think
circles.
that it's right.
So let me ask you this then.
To accept it.
Yeah. If we were to discover some peer review research, and I can't tell you exactly what it says, but maybe over the past 5 years, there's been half a dozen studies that talk about the keto diet. Not a whole lot, but just a few. And all of them point to no correlation between the effects you're describing. Would that actually lower your confidence?
Well, see, that's where I'm struggling because there are those studies. There are studies that say that it does work, and there are studies that say that it doesn't work. So I'm kind of doing what religious people do, where I'm saying there, but my personal experience is convincing me that it works.
Yeah.
And I want to believe true things, but it's really hard to overcome that personal experience. So it's kind of, even though it's not religious based, I find myself doing the same thing.
Well, I think, first of all, just exercise in general is pretty good for you. So I'd say don't stop doing that, even if you find out that the keto stuff isn't working for you. But that's the thing with health, science in general. It's kind of hard because there's lots of different variables and lots of different things to compare. So I think you're doing the right thing in being very considerate about this may not actually be affecting this variable and these relationships might not be there. I don't know, Drew, what would you say is the next step in this sort of SE process as a breakdown of whether or not the keto diet is, a good thing or not?
Okay. So I think that what I'm wondering here, and this breaks the straight SE dialogue a bit, but I think that with talking with Janet, I think that it still would be productive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
you can ask me anything. It's cool.
So, Janet, if we placed and this may seem a little bit confusing when you're coming at it from an SE perspective at first, because it's not an SE thing exactly, but almost. If you placed the likelihood that this is true, or based on the evidence that's out there, based on, I'm trying to describe this in a good way. I think that's okay. If you were to put a percentage on exactly how likely this is to be true based on evidence outside of your personal experience, based on like objective evidence, then between 0 being there's absolutely no reason to think this objectively, and 100, the evidence is pretty much perfect. There's been tons of, maybe meta-analyses or something like that, all showing that this is great. It's perfect, impeccable evidence. You could never disprove it. Where do you think the evidence for the keto diet falls as far as, something outside of your personal experience goes?
I'm going to say, because I did research it, so this is actually based upon my own, and I researched peer review through work, so I actually looked at the science, and I'm going to say it's between 40 and 50%. So it's like square, like half, because you have some that say it's effective, and it literally is because it's effective for a certain subset of people. So so that kind of skews the data a little bit. But I would say it's about half.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
maybe a little bit less than half.
Okay, so a little less than half. And you tend to think that personal experience is not particularly reliable in general. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. Right.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that you should just take that, accept that, and then accept that something is true.
Okay.
So yes, I agree that you shouldn't do that under normal circumstances.
So percentage-wise, where is your confidence on the scale?
See, I'm going to go with like 70.
Okay.
Because I am not entirely convinced that it's from just the diet alone, but I kind of am. But then I have a theory about why it may be working. But yeah.
So if the evidence is a little less than half, between 40 and 50% or so, and then your confidence is above that, then
Right.
I think that you have, if you would agree here, I think that you have given your reasons for saying, this is the reason that the discrepancy is there, right? You said that you have your own theories, you have your own personal experience, and it's convincing whether or not you tend to think it rational or not. But is the discrepancy there between your confidence and the evidence? Your confidence up here, evidence down here. Is this space a reasonable space to actually allow to move around? Should your confidence be above where you think that the evidence actually is? Is it reasonable to make the leap from 40 to 50 up to 70?
No, and if it was somebody else, I would be like, well, the science doesn't show it. So personal anecdote aside, it probably isn't attributed to that. I mean, that's what I would tell somebody else. So that's why that's kind of what I'm saying. It's like I hold this belief, and I really don't have a good reason for it.
Yeah, so there's something else that's giving you that 70%. That's giving you that space. And I guess.
Well, I think I'll tell you what my theory is,
okay.
and then maybe we can break it down from that. Like my theory isn't that it's so much the diet itself, as far as like the high fat, medium protein, and low carbs. It's because when you do the keto diet, you basically eliminate sugar. So I think that the positive things that I've seen, which is weight loss and anti-inflammation and the acid reflux, is more likely attributed to eliminating things that I wasn't tolerating well. So it is kind of the diet, but by the nature of the diet, I'm seeing results that maybe normal, quote unquote, people would not see.
Yeah, and maybe that's something you could also research as well. Those particular variables and see where that gives you. But I think it's also important to consider that even though you have this discrepancy here, let's say that you do end up being at 50% confident. You could just be justified in having that belief. You don't always have to be 100% confident in one way or the other. And I think it's okay to be in that space of I'm this percent confident. I think we trick ourselves into thinking that we have to always know things one way or the other, but that's not the honest answer. The honest answer is we have some evidence here that says yes, we have some evidence here that says no, and that's just the space that we kind of live in. So first off, I want to applaud you for really considering this and doing the research and trying to figure out whether this thing is true or not.
Well, I got to give my daughter credit for that because she made me do it because she's like, you're not going to start this until you research it. And then she also told me, you're not going to be one of those people who sits down and eats a pound of bacon and no vegetables. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Because people literally do that on keto. Yeah. They literally just have like a pound of bacon. And no, I'm not one of those people. I actually still, have spinach and stuff like that. It's just you're limited in what you can have. So, yeah. But I don't take credit for that. I give my daughter credit for that because she made me do it. But yeah, I mean, I can appreciate what you're saying, and it's just I feel like I'm one of those people who like I want to have good reasons for believing it. So I like constantly kick myself because I'm like, is it really because of the diet, or is it because I've made this change in like my lifestyle? And then also, you also have to practice a lot of portion control, which clearly is an issue for especially a lot of Americans.
Yeah.
So I think that also plays into it. So I probably do have a good reason for why it's working. It just may not be specifically that. Like the keto itself.
So I would say,
but I'm going to stick with it anyway because it's working.
Yeah. So I would say be confident in the variables are working for you.
Yeah.
Those changes in habits that you're talking about, whether it's through exercise or portion control, like you're talking about, those can be shown across the board to be good things. So take those. If you need to be 100% confident about something, be confident that you're doing those things and that this is different from what you're doing before and that you can see results from that. As far as the food intake, I don't want to be the one to say, yes, keep doing it, and then find out later that it's not great for you because, that would be awful.
No.
I can't.
We're good on that.
Yeah.
We're good on that because, like I said, I try to make sure I have a balanced, thing of like all the leafy greens and all that. So it's all good.
You have more research.
I'm not doing the pound of bacon, I promise.
Yeah, that's good. You have more research on the topic than I do. And I trust that ultimately you're going to be the one that's going to be making the decisions anyway. So I'm glad that you are choosing to do that. And I'm glad you're willing to have this conversation with us. This was very fun. And
I appreciate it. I wanted to try to do something different too. And I appreciate your guys' time. Love you both. So
yes, thank you.
Good job on the shows, both of you.
Thank you so much, Janet. We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Janet,
if I can just point out really quick, I just wanted to say that, I think on this show and, with my content and with anything that you do, we're not trying to necessarily promote particular beliefs.
No, not at all.
That's not really it. We're trying to promote more of a method of questioning.
Yeah. I have no idea if the keto diet is good or not. I've done zero research. Yeah.
We're not just trying to debate those facts here. And what makes me not so worried, because a lot of the time people do come to me for like diet advice because I talk about alternative medicine stuff sometimes. And I tell them, I'm not a physician. You should go talk to somebody with actual expertise in this. That's where you're going wrong right now, is asking me rather than someone else.
Right.
But the reason I think that I don't worry about Janet so much here as I would someone else that's talking about the keto diet and this is why they think it's good and whatever. Even if their confidence is disproportionate to the evidence in certain ways, Janet seems to have a kind of more reliable method of coming to truth.
Yes.
Even if right now she feels like that she's at odds with that method really applying in. It seems like intellectually she knows that this is so, but she doesn't feel that it's so. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't actually have that method to finding out truth.
Correct.
And so she's not throwing out so many other things because of this one belief.
Right. She's cognizant of the weaknesses, the pros and cons of her belief and how she got to that belief. And she's willing to change her mind based on that same amount of evidence. She's created a standard by which her beliefs can change. And I think that's important because if we don't establish those standards, if we don't determine, what allows for that change, then we'll never know whether what we believe is true or not, because we haven't established what makes something true or what we're convinced of that being true.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting conversation. So now we are going to talk to Dean Meadows.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
How's it going, Dean?
It's going well. I've got a break from some online lectures that I'm doing. I just want to ask a couple of questions. They're not related in any way to each other. First, what is the number one stereotype that Christians misapply to atheists? And then two, and I don't know genetically modified skeptics' background, but what would it take for you, Dan, to go back to Christianity? And if genetically modified skeptic falls into kind of your same category, the question would remain the same for him.
Okay. First of all, I should say I know Dean. We've had conversations. Dean, you are a pastor at a church in, I don't know where, actually.
North Carolina.
We have a lot of pastors and people that come on the show that we talk to, apparently. It's really great. Dean and I have talked before. He's a good guy, as far as I know. So yeah, your first question was, what is the most common thing? I think, like, as far as like what Christians get wrong is, number one, definitely by far, every single time, the definition of atheism, or at least how most atheists in the community at large understand atheism. And I'm putting that out there first because I had it wrong, super wrong. And there's a video of me out there giving a definition of atheism on Anthony Magdamosko's channel that's just completely wrong and just not what the community uses. So if I was to change one thing about the Christian mind right now, if all the Christians in the world, I would adjust their definition of atheism that matches closer to what's actually in use amongst atheists, because I think there's a grave misunderstanding with how we use the term a lack of belief, or but the difference between knowing that there are no gods and not having a belief that there are any gods is huge, and it's very subtle, but it's a huge thing, and it makes it a huge difference when we're talking about our beliefs. And your second question was, what would it take for me to become a Christian? So I think that if we're talking about the traditional, because Christianity has a lot of different definitions, depending on who you talk to, and that means a lot of different things to different people. I think at base, if we're talking about the base value of Christianity, like the mere Christianity, I would have to be at least convinced that there was a man named Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago who did, in fact, die and rise again for the sins of humanity. And already there's like 5 different terms there that could be defined in different ways in different Christian communities on what that actually means. But if we could just talk about it as a historical fact, whether this event actually happened or not, or whether I have reason to believe that this event actually happened, I think that would be a start as far as Christianity. But that doesn't even answer the God question at all. Those could be 2 different things. And we kind of see it as the same thing because as Christians, you're taught to believe Jesus as God. But that could happen. Jesus could do all that, and God could be a completely different thing, or might not even be a thing at all, because epistemically they're kind of 2 different questions. So Christianity in particular, being the Christian claims of Jesus, I think that is my kind of starting point. So yeah, Drew, what do you think?
Okay, so yeah, two big questions. As far as what Christians get wrong, it's not just Christians. It's really anybody. I see actually other atheists do this to atheists too, and statistics in the United States even show that atheists often distrust, or people who just say, oh, like I don't really believe in God, or I'm not religious, tend to distrust atheists and almost see them as less human in a lot of ways, just like a theist might. But yeah, the biggest thing that people get wrong who aren't atheists, and sometimes they are even, is they dehumanize atheists by oversimplifying what they are and who they are, in the way that one of the things that people say is, you're an atheist, you don't believe in anything then, or you think that we came from nothing, or you think this, you think that, or you just got your feelings hurt by the church and so you left. And it's always, you just are this, you just are that. Well, no, I'm not just one thing or another. I'm just as human as you. That's the only just that's justified there. I'm just as human as you. I'm just as complex as you. My reasoning is just as nuanced and hard to understand and complex, as anyone else's. And so if I hate it when atheists say, "Oh, you're just a Christian because you were raised that way." Well, yeah, that might be a big reason or something, but that's not everything there. And if you insist that that's the only reason why any religious person is religious, then you're dehumanizing them by oversimplifying their entire being. And I just think it's just absolutely ridiculous to do that. So I won't do that to you. And I think that, it's not fair of me to do that to you for being a pastor. I'm not going to say, "Oh, you just are Christian because of this." And I just ask that you do the same. And, if you're kind of a friend of Dan's and you're calling in and asking, I feel like I can probably safely assume that you're a person who really tries not to oversimplify what atheists think, because it sounds like you're actually curious about it. So kudos to you. I want atheists to reciprocate.
Well, yeah. No, I agree with you there. I think that the thing that bothers me the most, and this is just in culture in general, is that there is a lot of oversimplification towards people that we might disagree with, and I think to a large extent, not just politically, but even in the big divide between people who lack a belief in God and those who affirm a belief in God. The oversimplification, I think, is driven from a point of, or can be driven from a point of what you've talked about as far as dehumanizing the other side. And one of the things that I think is beneficial, I think that both sides have to do a better job of, is not going for the red meat, I guess you could say, towards specific audiences. I'm not saying that you guys do that. I've told Dan multiple times I love y'all's show, but personalities both in the atheistic community and certainly in the Christian community, oftentimes the reason why they do oversimplify that is so that they can get red meat to their subscribing audience, and their subscribing audience can just be an echo chamber for to affirm how awesome their representative is. And I don't think that gets anybody anywhere, because I think whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, the question of God's existence, is Christianity true? I think that those are really, and I think you would agree with me that those are monumental questions that simply to oversimplify those for the sake of, building up a subscriber base is pretty bad. And I'd like to see the conversation move more towards, okay, well, what are the, what's the genuine case for the lack of belief, and what's the genuine case for the belief that Christianity is true? And I think if we get there in a specific, I think if we get to that point without the oversimplification and without the dehumanizing, I think that's, like you've talked about, multiple times in your show, that's where you can really have a substantive discussion and truth can genuinely be found. So,
yeah, no, I totally agree. And this is not a partisan idea, right? This isn't like an atheist idea. This isn't a Christian idea. I think this is just hopefully it's not tooting my own horn or anyone else's here. I don't know if we could actually, put that on a show, me tooting Dan's horn, but yeah,
not on public television for sure.
that would have to stream on my channel, right?
Yeah.
But no, I think that it's just a bit.
I think there are laws against that. Sorry, go on.
It's just a bit more of a nuanced or hopefully mature idea that we shouldn't oversimplify and we shouldn't just straw man. A lot of the time people make like response videos and stuff in my sphere, and it's low hanging fruit. And like sometimes it's just for entertainment, it's just funny, whatever. But sometimes people think that those are the actual issues. Like that's it. That's all there is. I mean, this crazy person with a cell phone made a video, and then, this atheist YouTuber responded to it, and that disproved all of Christianity. Now, there are some atheists out there who think that. Nobody in my circle that I know of really actually thinks that. A lot of the time it's just, you're just playing around with jokes there. But I think that we have common ground there, and it's not an atheist or a Christian issue to want to strive toward that. Now, to answer the second question, if I can here, Dan hit on the actual Christ part of it, which I think is an important aspect. Now, if I'm going to define Christianity as being more reliant on like Christian metaphysics, as a metaphysical perspective, like, the supernatural actually exists, and that God, the nature of God is such, as far as talking about maybe his like supernatural qualities. For me, I think we would first have to have some kind of reliable way of determining what the supernatural is and isn't. We'd have to be able to somehow observe or measure the supernatural directly. Now, whether or not that actually makes it definitionally natural is kind of another question. But we'd have to have some way to reliably look into what the supernatural is. And from there, I would need to have evidence that God's nature, like we need to directly observe that God's nature is this non-contradictory amalgamation of all of the omnis there, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, everything. It would need to be able to be observed and not just logically play out. It needs to, or put in like a syllogism that actually, makes sense. I feel like there needs to be evidence there. It needs to be observed and observable. And then as far as if you're talking about the Bible, if you want to get as material as actually talking about the Bible itself, I would need the Bible to be the one and only holy text which people, or just scripture, that no one disagrees about. Everyone fundamentally knows what the actual one truth of the Bible is, and that would demonstrate that, and like that the message has always been unchanging. There hasn't been all this division about it among people who have really fundamentally been trying as hard as they possibly can. And then at that point, it would demonstrate that God actually created something which is just massively, infinitely superior to any literary work that man has ever produced. If it can't be demonstrated to be something that's massively just more comprehensible and complex than anything that man has ever produced, I don't know why I should think that it's anything but natural in origin. And so I do think it's natural in origin. I think if there's any flaw or any division over what it means, it basically ends up showing that God is a flawed author who can't get across his points, even to people who care about this question, as much as they possibly could. Like, I think of myself as being one of those people, and I'm sure that you're one of those people as well that really cares about this issue. So I think that Christianity being true would make it to where people like us would never even be able to disagree, and yet we would still have free will. And I think that a supernatural power could make that happen, but I don't think that there is a supernatural power behind it because it hasn't happened.
Ooh. Hey, Drew, I want to give a counterpoint right now to you with something you just said.
Okay.
Because I actually disagree with you a little bit. Because I think your fundamentalist Baptist Christianity is showing a little bit. Because your idea of Christianity being true has to rely on the Bible being God's word, is what it kind of sounds like. And I think you can conceive of a Christianity in which the Bible is not necessarily God's word, or even not directly written by God, or even directly inspired by God. And you could imagine a conception of Christianity being true. And I think that does happen.
Yeah, I think that's valid criticism.
Yeah.
I'll jump in because
Mm-hmm.
I think Dan. This is going to sound weird, but Dan kind of beat me to the punch on that. Even if I weren't, and this is going to get into some questions about the Bible, but couldn't you make the case for? And this is just hypothetical. Could you make the case for Christianity being true, even if, and this is going to sound weird, couldn't you make the case for for the Bible being true, even if you couldn't demonstrate that it was divinely inspired.
Okay, well, let's define something here. What do you mean by the Bible being true?
So maybe a better definition would be historically reliable, that the things that are in the Bible, say, I mean, like you talked about, like the resurrection is probably the most common one that's talked about. Say, even if that specific section and account can't be shown empirically to be divinely inspired, you could still show that it was an actual historical event, and therefore the premise of Jesus being divine or the resurrection taking place is true. Does that make sense?
I think so. Let me try to repeat. You're saying even if the Bible wasn't divinely inspired and that we could prove that the Bible was historically accurate in its claims of Jesus' resurrection, we could demonstrate Christianity to be true? Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm saying, so Drew, and I don't want to miscategorize what Drew said, but, he said you'd have to show that it was, and correct me at any point where I'm wrong, Drew. It seems like you're saying that in order for the Bible to be, or for Christianity to be true, you have to show that the book itself was inspired by God or influenced by God. But what I'm saying is, even if you took it just from a humanistic standpoint, in the same way that you would do historical investigations about certain historical events related to Rome or Italy or anything, Italy is part of Rome, but ancient Rome, ancient Babylon, if you took those historical measures and you put it towards something like the resurrection, if it were possible to use those methods and show that that was true, wouldn't that make a certain tenet of Christianity true, even if you couldn't show that it was divinely inspired?
Yeah, in the way that I think that the narrative of the historical narrative of Christianity would then potentially be true if that was able to be evidenced. And I'm not saying either way that it is or isn't here, but yeah. Ultimately, though, I don't think that, I don't know that you're actually saying this, I don't think that the historically being true is necessarily going to give any kind of validity to Christian metaphysics.
No, I see what you're saying there. I think Christian metaphysics and the historical reliability of the Bible are two different subjects there. I see what you're saying there. I was just giving a little bit of cordial pushback to the idea that we would have to show that the Bible is inspired by God empirically to demonstrate that the accounts were true. Does that make sense? And if I mischaracterized your argument, then let me know.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying there.
Okay, but hey, thanks for calling. My family just walked in from a trunk or treat down at the church, so I got to go put my girls down. But appreciate you guys and appreciate the show. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, Dean. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, thanks for the call, and I think that you've represented Christians and Christianity well. Keep doing it.
Thanks, man.
There you go.
Appreciate it.
Oh, all right. Yeah, that's Dean for you.
Yeah, seems like a cool guy. I really appreciate that discussion, and I hope that he calls back.
Yes, so it's interesting if we're talking about establishing, because when we're talking about historical events, we're dealing with probabilities in some way. I think we have to see what's most probable because we can't know exactly all the information that happens in a historical event. And we use narratives as a device to kind of explain the general happenstance, but in truth, it's the way that humans function in history is so complex and so many decisions are happening and so many actions are happening that it's impossible to simply describe on an individual level. So we do create these kinds of narratives. And I like how you pointed out about this the Christian narrative, because there is a Christian narrative about the events and how they took place and what took place and who were the actors in the scenarios and stuff. And there's a lot of individual levels that I would wonder, okay, if we took this out and changed that, would that make Christianity more or less true? Like, what does the ramifications of that, or what does it even mean to say that Christianity is true when it comes to that? So it's a fascinating discussion that definitely we could talk about more in the future. But if you have time, Drew, we have one more caller.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and give this one last caller who's been waiting very patiently a shot here. This is Jason. Jason, what's going on?
Hey, guys. I love your show. And so far, it's been really fascinating. I just thought I'd mention that I'm an actuary, and all the talk of probability and statistics so far has been pretty interesting. But also, I have a comment about something else. But I just wanted to briefly mention Janet, one of your earlier callers, and maybe other people. I had read a couple books recently that'd be really fascinating for her. Probably they're Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and also The Undoing Project, which is a biography of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, which both of those books talk about how humans their internal algorithms for mixing real data with their personal experience, and how we make big mistakes sometimes. But anyway, so I was calling because I had a comment about a different show where you guys had a caller who was a Christian and who was sharing some really personal experiences about themselves, where the caller's sister had died when they were committed suicide when she was much younger. And she basically, if I can paraphrase, she was saying she seemed like atheism seemed to make logical sense to her. It appealed to her in that way, but she was saying that emotionally she couldn't bear the thought of not being with her loved ones again, and that she missed her sister. And Christianity kind of promises that to people, and that she couldn't not be a Christian because she'd be giving that up. And so my question is this: like, how do you feel about providing comfort, or how would you go about providing comfort for people in that kind of situation? I mean, not that one specifically, but just like breaking with Christianity, and that it's an emotional break, and maybe your personal experience or something. How would you comfort somebody in that situation? And then I could tell you how I do that for myself, being an ex-Christian. So that's my question.
Yeah, it's tough. This was kind of drawing on what we were talking about earlier in the show. Somebody asking about how to talk to their wife about their beliefs about the afterlife and how to kind of reconcile that. If someone were to ask me in particular how I feel about something, I would say that it was a privilege to be alive, and that though sometimes I take it for granted, I have to remember that I'm here and this is the only life that I have. And sometimes we get reminded in very bad ways. Sometimes people that we know pass on, and it can be a combination of saddening, frustrating, annoying, confusing, a lot of emotions to take into account. So I would have to evaluate someone's emotional state first, depending on the kind of answer that I give. But if they were ready to receive another perspective on what it meant for that person to be alive, I would say that there isn't always going to be a reason why people pass on. You're not going to find it. At least for me, I'm not going to find it, right? I'm not going to I could pray every day for the rest of my life, and I'll never find a reason why things happen the way that they do. So I would say you shouldn't look for reasons like that because it's not healthy. Instead, I would say look for reasons for why they were in your life in the first place and why they were there to help you in your journey and help other people's journeys. Because at the end of the day, when someone passes on, that's what you have left of that person. The memories of what they did. If the actions that they did will continue on in the space that we live in. And you can be happy about that. And there are ways to be happy about that. And hopefully you'll come to a place where you can recognize that what's left is something happy. Because the good thing about passing on and dying is that the bad things go away with that too. Because we're not all perfect people and we all have problems. But the bad things that I've done, I won't have to worry about doing any more bad things, after I die as well. So there is other ways to look at that. Drew, what do you think? Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say thanks for that, because I think sometimes in the show people are calling in and we get bogged down in the logic and forget that people are feeling like complex things and they're feeling multiple things at the same time and like relating to people on an emotional level and sometimes going a little bit away from the logic. I think it's helpful. So, but yeah, anyway, Drew, I'm wondering what how you feel about that question.
Yeah, so Dan answered it on a more individual level there, and again, I'll answer it on a more societal level. So people tend to lose supernatural belief and leave supernatural belief behind when they have more material and real world replacements for the things that give them existential security in their supernatural beliefs. So basically, solving this or answering this question, solving this problem on the level of a group really has to do with making sure that your family is cohesive and supportive, that you have good ways to communicate with each other in order to solve problems, that you have things like healthcare, that you have a roof over your head, you've solved all of your basic needs. And then you're going beyond that in order to strive for self-actualization and if you look at it in a kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if anyone out there is familiar with that, you have all your bases covered, but then beyond that, you're given room to be able to develop and have strong relationships and have things like hobbies, have things that give your life fulfillment and richness, and you don't have to worry every day about those things being just stripped away from you because you're going to not have enough money or because you're not going to have a family there or something like that. So solving a lot of these more material problems ends up solving a bunch of our existential problems, and science actually validates that. And so that's why I tend to talk about that. And so beyond just talking about, what you can say to this person or what anyone can do to remedy this kind of existential crisis on an individual level, what we can do to remedy it is to create a society that has already been demonstrated to solve the existential crisis. We're not exactly sure what mechanism goes beyond having these things at our disposal, having this basically prosperity, but it happens. And so I'm interested in creating the kind of society that supports people in such a way to where no one will need supernatural belief and will probably just leave it on their own regardless of what worldview is just presented to them all the time.
Yeah, I like that. I want to add on to that real quick because what you're describing is something true about humans is that we're beings with mechanical processes, and losing a loved one is like losing a bit of that process, a piece of that process. And there are ways to mitigate losing that are better than others. And I like how you mentioned that it is kind of a social problem because different societies deal with death in different ways, some more positive than others. And we can look at the ways that people in those kinds of cultures that deal more positively deal with it and then, bring it into our own lives. For me, it's cultivating a secular humanist culture in my thinking and stuff. And that's why my answer to you is essentially a perspective of secular humanism, because I'm a natural thing in a natural system, and so I have to. That's where my point of view comes from. So yeah, I like how you can also approach it from a more external point of view that doesn't necessarily involve our philosophical views on life, and just actually point at it empirically. That was very well done, Drew.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I guess I just have one last comment, and that's I really appreciate those perspectives. That makes a lot of sense to me. And my comment is just my personal experience. And it kind of came about from reading a couple of books. Actually, one of them I mentioned already was that Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And what he talks about in there is kind of how people actually experience life. And there are two basic perspectives. There's this perspective of being in the moment, like how you value what you're experiencing right in the moment. And then there's this kind of retrospective experience where you look back on your life and you judge it. And they're both valid, and people experience both of those things. It's not really one or the other. And I was thinking about how people who were in my life and then and they're not around anymore. And thinking about how I'm thinking about it from retrospectively as a person who travels through time. But if I thought about it as the person who experienced things as they happened, then those people are really always with me. So that's kind of how I think about it. Like. Or putting it another way, I'm a person who humans kind of think of time as this stream, or you're just moving along, and once you've gone through a moment in time, you can't get it back. But I think that's just a limitation of our brains, and really we're really kind of existing in that entire time. So those people that I've been around, they're really, I'm always really there. I don't having them or thinking of them or feeling them as being gone is kind of is really just a myth. It's not really. It's just how I experience time.
Yes.
But if I'm actually always have them there, and so that's one way that I recently started thinking about it, and I thought maybe that would be sharing my personal way might help that caller. But yeah, so
absolutely. If you understand naturalism as your philosophy, then you are part of a grand system and you don't actually leave that system in a way that you might think. You have more indirect means of affecting that system after your death, because your death suddenly has an effect on the people around you in a different way than you would when you're alive. So there's a lot of ways to think about that. I also like to think of it as I like to take stoicism as well, in the sense that I don't necessarily need these people in my life. There's nobody that I need to be. I can be self-reliant, but I'm thankful for what they've done and what they've continued to do and what they've taught me, because it was nice knowing them. And I know that they would want the same thing. So, Jason, I'm glad you called. Thanks for dropping in. I hope to hear from you again soon. Yeah, thanks. That was deep. Yeah, sure was. All right, man. We'll see you later. Now, that's about it. We're wrapping up Truth Wanted for the night. Drew, thank you so much for being my guest co-host again for this show. If you like Truth Wanted and you want to keep supporting it, we have a Patreon. It's the Truth Wanted Patreon. You can look at that. Like I said at the beginning of the show, we have an iTunes feed now coming up, so look forward to that. I will be here again on Sunday with my man, Anthony Magnabosco. We're going to be talking about some street epistemology and some other stuff. And he will actually be here in the studio. So look forward to that. Get excited. And then after that, we're going to keep doing the Friday night streams at 6 o'clock Central Time as usual. So next Friday, if you can't make this Sunday, you can look forward to my friend Tyrone from the Let's Chat YouTube channel. He will be joining me. He is excellent at street epistemology. He's called into the show before, and he's going to be a wonderful guest. If you want to know where you can find more of this stuff, make sure you subscribe to the Truth Wanted YouTube channel and follow me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan. And you can also log into Facebook on the Truth Wanted Facebook group. Drew, where can they find you at?
Well, I am Genetically Modified Skeptic on YouTube and Facebook, GM_Skeptic on Twitter. And I just want to say, as a guest here, one of the reasons I support the ACA so much is because they are the ones that are striving to create the kind of society that allows us to not only just not believe, irrational things and things like that, but to grow in such a way to where we don't need these beliefs for comfort anymore because we have each other. So that's why you should support the ACA, and that's why you guys should check out not my Patreon, but Truth Wanted's Patreon, because I think that you're going to get a lot out of it, not only on an individual, but also societal level. So that's why I'm here. So regardless whether or not you check out my stuff, support them.
Woo! What a great endorsement. All right, guys, that about wraps it up for Truth Wanted for tonight. Thank you for joining me. Remember, keep wanting the truth. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next week.